Before continuing, leave a like, subscribe to the channel and stay until the end, because the details coming now are almost never explained in this way. The resurrection of Lazarus. What did he see while he was dead? 4 days. In first-century Judea, that was the number that separated hope from impossibility. The rabbis taught that the soul hovered over the body for 3 days, still connected, still close. On the 4th, the separation became definitive. The body began to undo itself. Decomposition advanced. There was no turning back. When Jesus finally arrives in Bethany, he finds a sealed tomb, a rotting body, and 2 sisters destroyed by grief and by the question they could not silence. Why did he not come sooner? Everyone knew it was too late. But what happens when too late meets someone who exists outside of time? The story begins with an urgent message sent by 2 desperate women. Lazarus, a resident of Bethany, a small village perched on the slopes of the Mount of Olives, about 3 kilometers from Jerusalem, falls gravely ill. It was not a common fever. The text suggests something fulminant, a rapid deterioration that frightened the sisters to the point of seeking immediate help. Martha and Mary send a messenger to Jesus with simple words charged with absolute confidence. "Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick." Observe the formulation with care. They do not ask for a miracle. They do not beg. They do not give instructions. They do not say, "Come heal," nor "Come quickly." They merely inform. The verb to love carries the entire weight of the expectation. It was like saying, "You know what to do. We trust." If Jesus loves Lazarus and the gospel confirms 3 times that he did, the answer would be obvious. He would come running, but he did not come. The Gospel of John is explicit on this point and does not attempt to soften what seems at first glance an incomprehensible, almost cruel failure. Jesus receives the news, recognizes the gravity of the situation, and makes a decision that defies any human logic. He remains where he was for 2 more days. 48 hours of deliberate waiting. 48 hours in which Lazarus agonizes, his breathing becomes irregular, his body begins to fail. 48 hours in which he dies, is washed, perfumed, wrapped in strips, carried to a cave, and buried behind a stone that weighed more than a ton. Jesus knew all of this, and even so he did not move. Why the delay? The text itself offers the answer, though it is difficult to accept when one is in the midst of suffering. This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby. The phrase sounds almost insensitive if read in haste, but the meaning is precise. Jesus was not absent due to carelessness or lack of love. He was absent for a purpose. The miracle that was to come required that all human hope be first completely eliminated. It was not enough to heal a sick man. Any prophet could do that. It was necessary to call a dead man, and not a recently dead man, a dead man who already stank. A dead man about whom no one could say, perhaps he was merely in a coma. But before arriving at the tomb, you need to understand what those 4 days meant for Martha and Mary. They had seen Jesus heal strangers. They had witnessed lepers cleansed with a word, men born blind seeing for the first time, paralytics of 38 years standing up and carrying their mats. They knew what he was capable of, and now when sickness strikes their own house, when the man on the bed is someone Jesus declaredly loves, someone of intimacy, someone who likely hosted Jesus several times, he simply does not appear. With every passing hour, the fever consumes Lazarus. With every hour, the sisters look to the dirt road that connected Bethany to the Jordan, waiting for a familiar silhouette to appear around the bend. With every hour, they calculate mentally, the messenger must have arrived by now. Jesus must be on his way. He will walk through that door at any moment. Nothing. Lazarus worsens. The breathing becomes agonal. The eyes lose focus. And at some moment during those terrible days, surrounded by sisters who can do nothing but hold his hands, Lazarus dies. And the silence of Jesus continues. The body is prepared according to Jewish custom, a meticulous ritual that needed to happen quickly due to the climate. First, the ceremonial washing. Then, the application of spices between the strips of linen. myrrh and aloes principally, in a quantity that could reach 30 kilos depending on the financial condition of the family. The face is covered with a separate cloth called a sudarium. The hands and feet are bound with strips of fabric. The entire body is then wrapped firmly, almost like a cocoon, and carried in procession to a cave hewn into the white limestone rock so common in the region of Judea. These tombs were typical of the era, horizontal cavities excavated into the hillsides with a main chamber and sometimes side niches for multiple bodies. The entrance was sealed by a circular or rectangular stone that ran in a groove. Some of these stones weighed between 800 kilos and 1.5 tons, requiring 6 or 7 men to move them. Once closed, the tomb remained sealed. The mourning officially begins. The first 7 days, called Shiva, were of intense and continuous lamentation. The bereaved family did not work, did not cook, did not leave the house. They sat on low benches or on the floor in a sign of humiliation before death. Visitors came to weep along, bring food, offer silent presents. It was a communal demonstration of pain that transformed the house into a sanctuary of lament. The text indicates that many Jews from Jerusalem made the short walk of 3 kilometers to Bethany to console Martha and Mary. The family was known. The proximity to the capital facilitated the flow. The house was full of mourners, muffled voices, intermittent weeping. First day without Lazarus, second, third, fourth, and then, when no one expected it anymore, someone runs in with news. Jesus is coming. Too late. At least that was what everyone thought. Martha does not wait. She rises in the midst of the visitors and runs to meet him before he enters the village. She needed to speak first. She needed to ask. And the first thing that leaves her mouth traversed centuries as one of the most honest, rawest, most human laments in all of Scripture. Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. There is no direct accusation. Martha is too careful for that. But there is pain, there is confusion. There is the question she does not completely verbalize, but which pulses in every syllable. Why did you not come? You could have prevented this. You chose not to prevent it. Why? Martha still adds a phrase that reveals genuine faith mixed with deep confusion. But I know that even now whatsoever thou wilt ask of God, God will give it thee. She does not know exactly what she is asking. She dares not verbalize the absurd, irrational, impossible hope that a man dead and buried for 4 days might return. It would be madness to say this aloud. But she leaves the door ajar. Just a crack. Enough. Jesus responds with a declaration that demands everything from her. Thy brother shall rise again. Martha understands this as a reference to the end times, to the general resurrection that the Pharisees taught, a real hope but distant, theologically correct but emotionally cold. She responds with pious resignation. I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus then pronounces one of the densest, most charged, most defining phrases of the entire gospel. I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Believest thou this? Do you perceive what he does? He does not say, I will bring the resurrection, or I know the way to life. He says, I am, present tense, first person. The resurrection is not a future event separate from him. It is something he carries within himself wherever he goes. Life is not a distant reward to be conquered. It is a present person to be encountered. Martha responds with a confession that perhaps she herself did not fully comprehend. Yea, Lord, I believe that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, which should come into the world. Mary is called next. When she sees Jesus, she rises quickly, runs to him, and falls at his feet. And the first words that leave her mouth are exactly the same as her sister's. Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. The identical phrase is no coincidence. It reveals that both repeated it to one another dozens of times during those 4 interminable days. It was the refrain of pain, the mantra of grief, the what-if that did not let them sleep, did not let them eat, did not let them breathe properly. If he had been here, if he had come, if he had not delayed. What happens next is one of the most humanly revealing, most theologically dense, most emotionally charged moments of the entire evangelical narrative. Jesus, before Mary, weeping prostrate at his feet, before the Jews who followed her and now lamented along, is deeply troubled. The Greek text uses a strong word, embrimaomai, which indicates an internal groan, a visceral commotion that comes from the depths of being, almost an indignation. It was not merely sadness, it was something more intense, something that shook. And then comes the shortest verse in the entire Gospel, 2 words in English, a sentence that theologians have dissected for 2 millennia. Jesus wept. The Son of God, who knew from the beginning that he would resurrect Lazarus, who had deliberately waited 4 days so that the miracle would be incontestable, who had absolute power over life and death, weeps before a tomb. Real tears running down the face, not a performance, not a symbolic gesture. Weeping. Why? This question has no single answer. Some scholars suggest that Jesus wept not for the death of Lazarus itself, but for the unbelief that surrounded him, for the hardness of heart that persisted even before so many signs. Others propose that he wept anticipating his own death, which this miracle would accelerate irreversibly. Still, others understand that Jesus wept because death, even being temporary in that specific case, is a cosmic aberration, a violent intruder that should never exist in God's original creation. Death was not part of the plan, and even having the power to reverse it, Jesus feels the weight of it. The text does not resolve the ambiguity, but it records the fact with brutal simplicity. Before death, God does not remain indifferent. God weeps. Those present react in opposite ways, as always happens. Some say, perhaps with genuine admiration, "Behold how he loved him." Others murmur with barely disguised cynicism, "Could not this man, which opened the eyes of the blind, have caused that even this man should not have died?" The division was already installed even before the miracle happened. Some wanted to believe. Others wanted reasons not to believe. Jesus directs himself to the tomb. It was a cave, likely excavated horizontally into the rock, with the entrance blocked by a large circular stone that ran in a groove. The smell must have already been perceptible even from the outside. He stops before the sealed entrance and gives an order that no one expected to hear. "Take ye away the stone." Martha hesitates. The protective instinct speaks louder than faith, and her objection is devastatingly concrete, impossible to spiritualize. "Lord, by this time he stinketh, for he hath been dead 4 days." Here the gospel allows no escapes. Lazarus's body was in active and advanced decomposition. In a climate like that of Judea, where temperatures in the spring can easily exceed 25 degrees during the day, the process of putrefaction begins a few hours after death. In 4 days, the reality would be grotesque. The gases of decomposition would have already distended the abdomen. The skin would have changed color. The odor would be unbearable, capable of provoking immediate nausea in anyone who approached. Martha is not being pessimistic. She is not demonstrating a lack of faith. She is being brutally realistic. She is protecting Jesus from the embarrassment of seeing and smelling what remained of his friend. And it is exactly this realism that the gospel makes a point of recording in every letter. There was no possible trick. There was no chance whatsoever of Lazarus being merely in a deep coma, in a cataleptic state, in any condition that could be confused with death. The body was rotting. Any physician of the time would confirm without hesitation, this man is finished, definitely, irreversibly. Jesus responds to the objection with a question that echoes the previous conversation. "Said I not unto thee, that if thou wouldest believe, thou shouldest see the glory of God?" The stone is removed. Probably several men were needed, pushing together. The seal is broken. The darkness of the cave is exposed to the light of day, and with it, the stench invades the air. Those present likely recoil. Some cover their faces with their garments, others turn their faces away. Jesus does not recoil. He lifts his eyes and prays aloud. The prayer is strange, almost didactic. "Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me, and I knew that thou hearest me always. But because of the people which stand by, I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. He is explaining in real time that the public prayer is not for his benefit. It is for those watching. It is so that no doubts remain about where the power comes from. And then comes the command that splits human history into two halves. Lazarus, come forth. 3 words, in English. 2 in Greek, Lazar duro exo. A direct personal call, by name, not an incantation, not a magic formula, not an elaborate ritual, just an order, like someone calling someone who is sleeping in the next room. And the dead man obeys. Lazarus exits the tomb. The text describes the scene with disturbing visual precision. And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. He walks out of the darkness, still completely tied. The funeral strip still wrapping his limbs, the sudarium still covering his face, moving with difficulty, likely stumbling but moving. There is no description of celestial light tearing the clouds. There is no choir of angels descending. There are no thunders, nor earthquakes, nor cosmic phenomena. The focus of the gospel is not on the visual spectacle. It is on a single thing, the authority of the voice. A man dead for 4 days in active decomposition, with a body already stinking, hears his name being called, and answers. Jesus gives the last practical instruction. Loose him and let him go. The strips are removed. The sudarium is taken from the face. And Lazarus is there, standing alive, breathing, blinking against the sunlight that his eyes had not seen for 4 days. And then begins what is perhaps the most disquieting, most disconcerting, most theologically charged part of this entire story, the silence. Lazarus says nothing. Absolutely nothing. The Gospel does not record a single word coming out of his mouth after the resurrection. No testimony of what he saw during those 4 days. No description of light at the end of the tunnel. No account of meetings with deceased ancestors. No vision of angels, of thrones, of judgments, of paradise or torment. No revelation about what exists on the other side. 4 days completely dead. And absolute silence about what happened. This silence is not accidental. It is not forgetfulness by the author. It is not a narrative gap. It is theological, purposeful, loaded with meaning. And it is here that the story confronts head-on centuries of popular religious imagination. If Lazarus had seen something extraordinary on the other side of death, the Gospel would have recorded it. John wrote his account decades after the events, with more than enough time to interview witnesses, collect testimonies, include details that other Gospels omitted. The evangelist demonstrates throughout his entire book a clear inclination for profound theological reflections, for hidden meanings, for layers of interpretation. If there were an account of the beyond to be told, he would not have missed this opportunity, but there is no account at all. What does this mean? The Bible treats death in varied ways throughout its 66 books, but nowhere does it clearly describe a state of active and continuous consciousness between the moment of death and the moment of final resurrection. When Jesus speaks about death, he frequently uses the metaphor of sleep. About Lazarus, specifically, he said to the disciples before leaving for Bethany, "Our friend Lazarus sleepeth, but I go that I may awake him out of sleep." The disciples, confused, understood literally, "Lord, if he sleep, he shall do well." Jesus then was direct, without metaphors. Lazarus is dead. The comparison between death and sleep is neither accidental nor poetic. Sleep is a state of temporary unconsciousness. The person who sleeps deeply does not perceive the passage of time. 8 hours seem like an instant. There is no continuous experience, there is no travel to other planes, there is no active consciousness. The person simply is not, and then wakes up, often without realizing that any time has passed. The biblical pattern consistently suggests that death functions in a similar manner, an interruption of consciousness, not a transition to another scenario of experience. This is deeply uncomfortable for many. It confronts ingrained expectations. Many grew up believing that death is an immediate door to paradise, to burning hell, to intermediate purgatory, to instant reunion with parents, grandparents, children who departed before. Popular culture is saturated with images of the beyond: white lights, tunnels, loved ones waiting on the other side, immediate judgments, eternal destinies decided at the moment of the last breath. The resurrection of Lazarus confirms none of these scenarios, and his silence is the strongest evidence of this absence. Think well, if Lazarus had experienced 4 days of indescribable celestial glory, contemplating the face of God, surrounded by infinite light and peace, why did he not describe any of it? If he had passed 4 days in torment, in flames, in despair, why did he not return, warning everyone around? If he had met Abraham, Moses, the prophets, why did he not tell? If he had received revelations about the future, about heaven, about hell, why did he keep it all to himself? The silence suggests an answer that many do not want to hear. There was nothing to tell. Not because the beyond does not exist, absolutely, but because Lazarus was not conscious during those 4 days. For him, as for any person in deep sleep, time simply did not pass. He closed his eyes sick in Bethany and opened his eyes standing at the entrance of the tomb, without any intermediate experience to relate. But this is not the only disturbing thing in this story. What happens after the miracle is even darker, even more charged with tragic irony. The reaction to the miracle is immediate and violently divided. Many of the Jews who had gone to console Mary and witnessed what happened believed in Jesus at that moment. It was impossible to deny what they saw with their own eyes: a man dead for 4 days, stinking, walking out of the tomb on his own legs. But others, instead of believing, run immediately to the Pharisees and report everything in detail. The Sanhedrin meets in an emergency session. 71 men, the most powerful religious leaders of the nation, summoned in haste to discuss a single problem: Jesus of Nazareth. And the concern that dominates the meeting is not theological. It is political, pragmatic, cold. "What do we?" they ask one another, almost in panic. "For this man doeth many miracles. If we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him, and the Romans shall come and take away both our place and nation." The logic was brutal in its clarity. A leader too popular, accumulating too many followers, performing too many miracles, would inevitably attract the attention and repression of the Roman Empire. Rome tolerated the Jews as long as they remained quiet and paid their taxes. A growing messianic movement would be seen as insurrection, and the Roman response to insurrections was always the same: total destruction. Better to eliminate a problematic man now than to risk the destruction of the temple and the loss of the little power the religious elite still managed to maintain. Caiaphas, the high priest of that year, stands up and pronounces a sentence that John records with devastating prophetic irony: "Ye know nothing at all, nor consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation perish not." The evangelist makes a point of commenting, Caiaphas did not say this on his own. Without knowing, without wanting, he prophesied. Jesus would indeed die for the people, but not in the way Caiaphas imagined, not as a political criminal eliminated to keep the peace, as a cosmic sacrifice offered to redeem humanity. From that day on, the decision is taken and is irreversible. Jesus needs to die, and Lazarus too. John records a detail that the majority of preachers ignore completely. The chief priests consulted that they might put Lazarus also to death, because that by reason of him many of the Jews went away and believed on Jesus. The logic was simple and murderous. The man who returned from death became living proof of Jesus' power. As long as Lazarus breathed, as long as he walked the streets of Bethany, as long as he could be seen and touched and interrogated, he would be a walking testimony, impossible to refute. The simplest solution was to eliminate the evidence. Dimension the brutal irony of this situation. Lazarus is resurrected by the voice of Christ and immediately passes to live under a death sentence. The man who conquered the tomb now carries a target on his back. Every day that he continues breathing is an affront to the power of the religious authorities, a living proof that there exists someone with authority greater than theirs. And even so, before all this, Lazarus remains in silence. He does not defend himself publicly. He does not make speeches. He does not preach in the synagogues. He does not narrate visions of the beyond. He does not write memoirs. He does not become a celebrity. He does not capitalize on the experience. He merely exists, merely lives, merely breathes. And his simple existence, his silent presence, was already testimony more than sufficient. There is a last appearance of Lazarus in the Gospel, equally silent, equally charged with unspoken meaning. 6 days before the Passover that would change everything, Jesus returns to Bethany. A supper is prepared in his honor at the house of Simon the leper, likely someone Jesus had healed previously. Martha, faithful to her practical temperament, serves the guests. Mary, faithful to her contemplative temperament, does something extraordinary. She takes an alabaster box containing a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, valued at 300 denarii, the equivalent of almost an entire year's wages for a common worker, and anoints the feet of Jesus, wiping them with her own hair. The intense aroma fills the whole house. Judas Iscariot complains of the waste. 300 denarii that could have been given to the poor. The evangelist comments dryly that Judas did not care for the poor. He was a thief and stole from what was put in the common bag. Jesus defends Mary. Let her alone. Against the day of my burying hath she kept this. For the poor always ye have with you, but me ye have not always. Jesus was speaking of his own death, which would happen in less than a week. And Lazarus? The text says only that he was one of them that sat at the table with Jesus, present at the dinner, participating in the meal, listening to the conversation, but without saying a word that the gospel considered worthy of record. Present, alive, silent. A silent testimony that bothered the authorities more than 1,000 inflamed sermons could bother. This posture of Lazarus offers a lesson that the gospel does not make explicit directly, but suggests with force for those who have ears to hear. The miracle does not exist to satisfy human curiosity about the beyond. It exists to point, to reveal, to testify. And Lazarus understood this perfectly. He did not become the center of attention. He did not transform his experience into a personal platform. He did not open a school of studies on life after death. He did not monetize what he lived. He did not turn into a celebrity of the religious circuit. He simply existed, and his silent existence pointed consistently to another, to the one who called him back. What did Lazarus see while he was dead? The biblical answer is uncomfortable in its radical simplicity, probably nothing. Death, in the consistent pattern of the scriptures, is absence, not experience. It is sleep, not travel. It is silence, not continuous dialogue with spiritual entities. It is interruption, not a smooth transition to another scenario. And the resurrection is not the continuity of something that was already happening on the other side. It is the sudden eruption of divine power over the absolute void. This completely changes the focus of the questions we ask. Instead of asking obsessively, what exists after death? The biblical text forces a different inquiry, more urgent, more personal. Who has the authority to reverse death? Who can call someone back from nothingness? Who possesses in himself, not as an external tool, but as intrinsic reality, the resurrection and the life? The answer is in the voice that called Lazarus by name that afternoon in Bethany. A voice that did not ask permission of decomposition. A voice that did not negotiate with biology. A voice that was not intimidated by the 4 days of absolute human impossibility. A voice that simply ordered and was instantly obeyed by death, by time, by matter, by the laws that govern the physical universe. The resurrection of Lazarus was not written to satisfy human curiosity about the beyond. It was recorded to reveal authority. The text does not answer what exists after death. It confronts a much more uncomfortable question, much more personal, much more inescapable. Who has absolute power over it? The silence of Lazarus traverses 2,000 years of human history and remains heavy, purposeful, theologically charged to this day. He did not become a preacher of celestial visions. He did not turn into a cartographer of the spiritual world. He did not produce maps of the beyond. His only narrative function, his only reason for existing in that gospel, was to be living and silent proof of a single devastating truth. When God speaks, even death obeys. And perhaps that is exactly what the gospel wants you, reading this now 2 millennia later, to finally understand. The central question of this story was never about what Lazarus saw while he was dead. The central question is whether you recognize the voice that called him back, and if you would recognize that same voice when it calls you.